Please leave the room if this will affect you. Don't. This will hurt someone. Don't do that.
In January 1987, r.budd Dwyer's tragic death left America in shock. Not because he was particularly well known outside of Pennsylvania, but because his violent death took place in the most public place imaginable, a press conference, and it was all on camera. r.budd Dwyer, the acting Pennsylvania State Treasurer, was a week away from his sentencing on convictions connected to bribery. James Horshack and Deputy Treasurer Don Johnson assumed that their boss would resign at the press conference on January 22nd after making one last statement of innocence. But Dwyer had other plans. Robert Budd Dwyer graduated from Allegheny College in Meadville, Pennsylvania, and quickly became active in local politics. In 1964, running as a Republican, he was elected to the Pennsylvania House of Representatives and served until 1970. That year, while still a sitting state representative, Dwyer ran for a seat in the Pennsylvania State Senate and won. After winning re-election twice, Dwyer set his sights on the state office and ran for Pennsylvania Treasurer in 1980. He won re-election to the seat 4 years later. Around the same time, Pennsylvania officials discovered that some of its state workers had overpaid millions of dollars in Federal Insurance Contributions Act taxes due to errors in state withholding. Several top accounting firms across the country competed for the multi-million-dollar contract to determine the compensation to be paid to each employee. The contract was eventually awarded to a California-based firm, Computer Technology Associates, or CTA, owned by a native of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And that's when everything began to unravel. Months after the contract was awarded, Pennsylvania Governor Dick Thornburgh received an anonymous memo detailing allegations of bribery that took place during the bidding process for the contract, and named r.budd Dwyer as one of those people receiving a kickback in the deal. Dwyer, enraged, denied the accusations immediately and completely. He insisted the selection process had been honest, that he had no connection to CTA, and had never spoken to anyone about receiving money. But the memo triggered a political chain reaction. Investigations were launched. Journalists began digging. Political opponents whispered behind closed doors. And a federal grand jury was convened. Eventually, Dwyer, along with others, were formally charged with conspiracy, mail fraud, perjury, and racketeering. The evidence rested largely on testimony from former CTA executive, Bill Smith, who claimed Dwyer had accepted a $300,000 bribe to guarantee the contract award. Prosecutors offered Dwyer a plea deal: plead guilty to one charge, resign from office, and accept a 5-year sentence. In return, they would drop all other accusations. Dwyer refused. He believed taking the plea deal would be admitting to something he had never done. More importantly, a guilty plea would strip his family of the state pension that they depended on. He was convinced that justice would prevail at trial. It did not. On December 18, 1986, a federal jury found Budd Dwyer guilty on all 11 charges. He now faced up to 55 years in prison and a $300,000 fine. His sentencing was set for January 23, 1987. r.budd Dwyer's tragic death and the press conference that preceded it. On January 22, 1987, one day before his sentencing, Dwyer met with his press secretary James Horshack and Deputy Treasurer Don Johnson. They assumed the upcoming press conference would be his resignation speech. Dwyer led them through a brief discussion of what to say and how to frame it. The men left convinced Dwyer planned to end his career with one final plea of innocence. That night, alone in his house, Dwyer wrote a final note to his wife. I enjoy being with Joe so much. The next 20 years or so would have been wonderful. Tomorrow is going to be so difficult, and I hope I can go through with it." The next morning, the press conference began like any other. Reporters filed into a room at the state capitol in Harrisburg and prepared their cameras, expecting an official resignation. Dwyer calmly read from a prepared speech, reiterating his innocence and expressing deep concern about the state of the American justice system. But when he reached the end of his written statement, his tone changed. He paused, looked up, and began to speak from the heart. "I've repeatedly said that I'm not going to resign as state treasurer. After many hours of thought and meditation, I've made a decision that should not be an example to anyone because it is unique to my situation. Last May, I told you that after the trial, I would give you the story of the decade. To those of you who are shallow, the events of this morning will be that story. But to those of you with depth and concern, the real story will be what I hope and pray results from this morning, in the coming months and years. The development of a true justice system here in the United States. I'm going to die in office in an effort to see if the shameful facts, spread out in all their shame, will not burn through our civic shamelessness and set fire to American pride. Please tell my story on every radio and television station and every newspaper and magazine in the US. Please leave immediately if you have a weak stomach or mind, since I don't want to cause physical or mental distress. Joanne, Rob, Dee Dee, I love you. Thank you for making my life so happy. Goodbye to all of you on the count of 3. Please make sure that the sacrifice of my life is not in vain." In front of the gathered reporters and television cameras, he removed an envelope from under the podium. Inside was a .357 Magnum revolver. The crowd immediately began to panic as the former treasurer announced, "Please leave the room if this will affect you." Frederick L. Cusick, a journalist and friend of Dwyer's, who was sitting in the front row to cover the story, told the Los Angeles Times years later that he should have run and grabbed him when he pulled out the envelope. "I knew that was it." As people shouted and moved toward him, he lifted the weapon towards himself. Before anyone could safely disarm him, he carried out a fatal act, collapsing on the floor. He passed away, instantly, in front of the stunned reporters and cameras. How the media handled Dwyer's death. Although the press conference was not broadcasted live, several Pennsylvania television stations later aired edited footage of the event. Some stations froze the image before the moment of the death, while allowing the audio to continue. Others made the controversial decision to show the full, unedited recording, without any warning, during the early evening news. Because a snowstorm had closed schools in the area, both children and adults were at home watching television when the footage appeared. "I saw the raw footage of it," explained Richard Patrick, frontman of the band Filter, in a 2012 interview about the song, "Hey man, nice shot," he penned in the aftermath of the tragic death. "I'm from the suburbs, and I don't remember seeing a lot of things like that growing up. When you're 22 and you see that, you're like, wow, you can see anything on the internet now. Back then, we were watching it out of fascination, like, wow, we're all gonna die. That was a morbid curiosity. I was watching it and I was like, hey man, nice shot." R.Budd Dwyer's tragic death and the death of an honest man. In 2010, the documentary Honest Man, The Life of R.Budd Dwyer, attempted to resurrect the real story behind the shocking clip. Through interviews with his family and friends, it painted a portrait of a man broken by a system he had spent his life believing in. The film suggests his final act was not simply an expression of despair, but a deliberate attempt to expose the very corruption he believed had destroyed him. In 2010, the film premiered at the Carmel Art and Film Festival in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, with the Dwyer family in attendance. His death did indeed preserve his state pension. His wife and children received the benefits he feared would be taken away, if he stepped down or accepted guilt. But the greater question, whether his sacrifice helped fuel meaningful change or simply became another sensational headline, remains unanswered. What cannot be denied is this. On a snowy morning in January 1987, an honest man walked into a room full of cameras and turned his final breath into a message. A warning. A desperate plea for justice. Nearly 4 decades later, the echo of that moment still haunts American history.